Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show, a preview for our final wild card round matchup here tonight between the Rams and the Minnesota Vikings, right? The Minnesota Vikings, the fifth overall seed, playing the Los Angeles Rams, which are the fourth seed in the NFC. Except, like I mentioned before, it won't be taking place in Los Angeles because of the devastating wildfires there, obviously, and the air quality. The NFL decided to move this game to the Cardinal Stadium down in Arizona. So this is the second matchup for these two teams, considering that they're not division rivals. It's pretty unusual that they meet, obviously, twice in a season. So the last time they met up was in week 8, actually in Los Angeles, where the Rams played one of their best games on the offensive side of the ball. You had Matthew Stafford throw 4 touchdowns, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp being active for the game and having a huge impact on it, obviously. And they handed Minnesota one of their 3 losses on the year. So clearly, it is a moment in this regular season where the Vikings would like to have back for the fact that they gave up that amount of points to the Rams, but also we had that controversial non-call at the end of the game where I believe it was Byron Young that pulled Sam Darnold's face mask, but it wasn't called, and that really took away their opportunity to maybe come back in that game. So they want a bit of revenge, I'd assume, because they probably felt like they could have came back in that game. So, you have that storyline to follow in this game, obviously. But another interesting thing to follow in this game is that it's a meeting between two head coaches that are very, very familiar with each other. Obviously, Sean McVay and Kevin O'Connell. Kevin O'Connell was the Rams offensive coordinator before he took over the Minnesota job, and he was there during their Super Bowl victory and whatnot. And a lot of what Kevin O'Connell does is very similar to what Sean McVay still does over there in Los Angeles. So those two guys meeting, they're obviously friends off of the football field, so they're very, very well accustomed and familiar with each other, right? So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how they match up and coach against each other, right? That'll be something to keep an eye on. But also talk about storylines. This is Sam Darnold's playoff debut as well. He'll try to redeem himself from the worst game he played all season last week against the Lions in a high stake matchup where they could have been the number 1 seed, but he threw for only 166 yards. The Vikings only put up 9 points on offense. So very disappointing for the kind of talent that they have, and also for Sam Darnold from what he's shown us all season. He's played at a Pro Bowl level. He made the Pro Bowl. So that was very disappointing. So hopefully he can try to redeem himself for that performance. But talking about, first time performances and first time, appearances in the playoffs for the Rams, also they have a couple rookies on their starting defensive lineup that are going to be making their first start. 2 former Florida State University teammates, Jared Verse and Braden Fiske. Both starters on this Rams defensive line are also going to be debuting tonight. And in the second half of the season, both these guys, for anybody that's not really aware of their impact, both of them combined for 13 sacks and 21 tackles for loss. And really, Jared Verse made an impact against the Vikings last time. I believe he had a sack or a sack and a half against them in their last game, where the Rams obviously won. So he's looking to make more of an impact there. And Braden Fiske, I feel like a lot of people during the draft process fell in love with him with the very impressive combine that he had that elevated his draft profile a lot. And he was taken in the second round, and he was one of the guys that I really had an eye on. And he's one of those unsung heroes in the middle of that defensive line that you don't really notice too much when he is there because he's doing his job and doing it very well. But when he's not there, you can definitely tell when he's not there. And, he's one of those guys. And I think he can have a big impact in tonight's game trying to get after Sam Darnold, obviously. So, more on this game, the Rams put up points last time. They put up 30 points last time on the Vikings, but going into these playoffs, they're actually the lowest scoring team out of all the playoff teams so far, only averaging 21.6 points per game, and that defense that's very young, very inexperienced, has given up more yards also than any other playoff team in this year's playoffs, right? They've given up 353 yards as well. So, you have a Rams team that is entering as one of these underdog sort of teams that has a lot of talent on offense, but they're also capable of only putting up 21 points per game for all the talent that they have, and their defense as well is one that's not really anywhere close to being shut down or being as dominant, maybe as they once were during Sean McVay's era there. So it is interesting the sort of juxtaposition that this Rams team find themselves in, right? I feel like they're very well praised among a lot of people, including myself. I think they're a fantastic team, but also, the numbers and the stats over, the last portion of the season here kind of suggests something else. So I guess that adds to the level of unexpectedness that you go into a game against the Rams, right? Thinking a lot of people probably have this matchup in favor of the Vikings for that very reason, but you just never know with this Rams team. Their ceiling is just as high as anybody, but also, their floor is as low as a lot of like the fringe playoff card or the playoff teams, right? So that's also something I thought was pretty interesting, and there's no real like big injuries to talk about. Also, we should see as healthy of two teams going into this game as really we've seen in the playoffs. So that allows us to get to our keys of the game, one for each team. Looking at the Minnesota Vikings, the biggest thing I'd like to see them do, and the biggest thing I think they need to do really to get a win in this game, is that they got to try and stop, obviously, Puka Nacua in that passing game, right? Because that's been one of the things that has kind of hampered this Vikings defense. Their pass defense really hasn't been ranked amongst some of the best. So that is something that they have to try and address, obviously. But really, Puka Nacua and how much of an impact he made last time. He recorded 7 receptions for 106 yards. They obviously have to bring that down. And also Cooper Kupp contributed with 5 receptions for 51 yards also and a touchdown. So don't let them get too comfortable too early like last time. Because last time, Puka and Kupp were coming off of injury, and you would have never known because right away the Rams started off. Probably the first 6 targets, maybe more than that, went to Puka or went to Cooper Kupp to kind of get them back going into some sort of rhythm and flow. And I felt like the Vikings let that happen too easily. Everybody says that they weren't expecting them to play. All right, but at some point when they've targeted Puka 10 times. You're telling me you haven't adjusted at some point during that game, right? You're telling me that you couldn't do something to stop that from happening, again, in Puka's first game back from injury. So I'd like to see them kind of get into their face more, make it difficult for them to get any sort of reception, on a screen or anything like that. I think that's one thing that they have to do. So they stop this Rams team, really make it a struggle for them to pass the ball on this Vikings defense. And on the other side of things for the Rams, giving up yards is okay, right? I mentioned giving up 353 yards, right, is nuts. But make sure that when you do give up these yards and you do give up these drives that end up in the red zone or on your side of the field, just hold them to field goals, right? Hold them to field goals, because we've seen the struggles that this Vikings team has had in the red zone, especially last week where they went 0 for 4 on the red zone trips, and there was a couple chances where Sam maybe overthrew someone, or it just looked very tough for them to convert in the red zone. So for a young defense that might give up some big plays here or there, might give up a lot of receptions to Justin Jefferson, right? once you get into the red zone and everything gets close and tight and, shrunken down, right? Obviously, that's where you need to play your best defense, right? If you give up 90 yards, if you give up 70 yards each drive, but you hold them to, only a touchdown or two, that's a win. That's something that you can work with, especially because your offense is very capable of putting up points. So I want to see that from them. And along those lines, looking at the matchups, right, I'm looking at the Vikings defensive line going up against Kyren Williams, especially after last week where Jahmyr Gibbs ran all over them. He was the MVP of the game, obviously, for his impact. So I want to see how the Vikings respond to that. Are they going to get run through Kyren Williams, which we know obviously the Rams love to play through? Are they going to allow that to just happen again, or are they going to step up and stop that and kind of make the Rams one-dimensional? And the other matchup, I kind of touched on it earlier, is Kevin O'Connell against Sean McVay. Well, someone like that, I just like the fact that it goes beyond just playing any other, right, opponent or any other head coach. When you know someone like that, I think it brings you to another, part of your game plan where you really got to try something different. You got to try and almost, in a sense, kind of beat yourself in a way, right? Someone's so close, right, on a personal level that you got to throw something out there that they haven't even seen. So whoever wins that battle is going to be probably on the winning side of things. And the other one is just Jordan Addison and, TJ Hawkinson, Jalen Naylor going up against this Rams young secondary. Again, last week, Justin Jefferson got his, but Jordan Addison really wasn't a contributor to the game. TJ Hawkinson also not really. So they're capable of making an impact in these games, but if they're able to do that in tonight's game against, a Rams secondary that isn't particularly a great matchup for them, the Vikings aren't a great matchup for the Rams secondary. I think this could go in the Vikings' way a lot because they really are a mismatch for a lot of secondaries. But again, it just goes down to Sam Darnold and his ability to connect with these guys. So that just brings us to our prediction. Who I think is going to win tonight in really just less than an hour now from kickoff. I think I wanted the Vikings to be the number one seed. I felt like I was really on board with what they were doing. But, after last week, I don't want to make it sound like I think Sam Darnold, one bad performance just erases an entire season. I think that's pretty ridiculous. But after what I saw last week and, in these high-stake moments, and not even just that, but going into his first playoffs against Matt Stafford that has been there, seen a lot, has won a Super Bowl, and it's just one of those guys, right, that doesn't get talked about enough and is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I think it's just you might see moments in this game where you might miss a throw, something might be mismanaged, you use a timeout when you're not supposed to, and you see on the other side Matthew Stafford just orchestrating everything perfectly. I think for that reason, I'm going to go with the Rams here. I'm going to go with the Rams to win because they've won 9 of their last 11, and their offense is good enough for their defense. If their defense can just hold opposing teams to field goals and maybe 1 or 2 touchdowns here, this Rams team is always gonna have a chance to keep you in the game and win you a game if you put it in Matthew Stafford's hands. And not only Sam, Sam gets the majority of the criticism from last week, but also their defense, right? They let Jahmyr quite literally take over that game just by himself. So as much as Sam, wasn't on his game, that defense also didn't hold the Lions to 20 points or 17 points. They gave up 31 points. So I think that defense also really worries me a little bit. So for that reason, I'm just going to go with the Rams. I think the experience and things like that will just carry them over the hump in this last wild card spot. So we'll see if my prediction is true, is accurate after the game tonight. But that is going to do it for us on today's show. Thank you guys for joining me on this episode of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. thank you again for, joining the show. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show as well. And follow the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to see more of the Chip Shot Football Podcast, you can check out more of the content on both YouTube channels, the Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where you can see more of these previews, more of the reviews, breaking news, and just discussions around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you again for joining me. Make sure to watch the game. Tonight's game should be one of the better ones, along with the Commanders and Bucks game. And join me again tomorrow at the same time, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, to not only discuss that, but more of the wild card round. Again, back here again tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to